Cole had never expected to spend his days on a quiet, forgotten planet at the edge of the galaxy. He was a human engineer, stationed on an outpost with just a handful of people for company. His job? To maintain the machinery and equipment that kept the base running. Nothing exciting, just routine work. But that day was different. Cole was in the control room, staring at the data streams on his monitor, when something strange caught his attention. A signal. It wasn't part of the usual traffic. A strange, scrambled noise blinked on the screen. It wasn't a distress call, but it was different enough to grab his curiosity. He sat up straight, his fingers instinctively reaching for the controls. It was coming from the direction of the nearby desert. Maybe it was just some random interference, but something in the back of his mind told him it wasn't. The signal repeated, only clearer now, though still mostly unreadable. A few words managed to break through the static. Help. Attacked. Can't. His pulse quickened. It was a distress call, not just a random transmission. Someone was in trouble. Maybe a ship had crashed, or someone was stranded. Cole wasn't a hero. He was an engineer, a problem solver, not a soldier. Still, he couldn't ignore the call. He decided to investigate. The transmission had stopped for now, but the coordinates were locked in. He packed up his things and headed toward the outpost's vehicle. If someone needed help, he wouldn't be the one to ignore it. As he drove out into the desert, the landscape stretched out endlessly, with nothing but rocky hills and sand dunes. The wind howled through the emptiness, and the heat from the twin suns beat down on him. It was the kind of place where most people would never come. Too remote, too dangerous. Yet there he was, racing toward a signal he didn't fully understand. An hour into the drive, Cole spotted something ahead. A small, smoking wreck. The unmistakable outline of an alien ship lay half buried in the sand, its hull cracked open and torn apart. The sight was nothing short of a disaster. The strange ship, a sleek, silver craft, looked like it had once been state-of-the-art, but now it was nothing more than a hunk of twisted metal. Cole slowed the vehicle, scanning the wreckage with growing concern. He got out, grabbed his emergency tools, and cautiously approached the wreck. The ship's surface was still warm from the crash. The air smelled faintly of burning fuel. He scanned the area, looking for any signs of life. It was eerily quiet, the only sound the wind sweeping over the dunes. Then a faint groan reached his ears. "Hello," Cole called out, his voice barely audible over the wind. He scanned the wreckage more closely, and that's when he saw her. She was lying by the side of the wrecked ship, barely conscious. A woman? Alien, by the looks of her. She had pale blue skin, with dark markings that seemed to flow across her arms and face. Her body was slender, and her hair, if you could call it that, was a long, shimmering silvery blue. It caught the sunlight in strange ways, giving it an almost ethereal glow. Her clothes were strange, made of a fabric Cole had never seen before. They were torn and singed from the crash. The alien woman's eyes fluttered open for a moment, and she let out a quiet gasp. She tried to move, but her body trembled with weakness. Cole knelt beside her, gently brushing sand off her face. "Hey, it's okay. You're safe now. I'm here to help." She blinked at him, confused but still alert. She opened her mouth to speak, but only managed a few words before her voice faltered. I need help. My radio. Need. Fixed." Her words were barely audible, and Cole had to lean in to hear her properly. Her voice was weak, and her breathing came in shallow bursts. It was clear she was injured, but her concern wasn't for herself, it was for her equipment. Cole's eyes followed her gaze to a small damaged device she was clutching tightly in her hand. The radio. Cole looked down at the broken machine, seeing that it had suffered some kind of severe damage. The casing was cracked, and the antenna was bent. It looked like it had taken the brunt of the crash. But despite its battered state, there was something about the way she held it that told Cole it was important, more than just a piece of technology. It was crucial. "I can help with that," he said gently, though he wasn't entirely sure what he could do. He was an engineer, yes, but he'd never worked on alien tech before. Her eyes softened with gratitude, even though she was clearly in pain. She managed a small, weak smile before her eyelids fluttered shut again. Cole carefully picked up the radio and examined it more closely. He could tell it was high-tech, far more advanced than anything human-made. But with his training, he knew he'd be able to repair it. At least he hoped so. He turned back to the wreckage, the desert stretching out all around them, and sighed. This was no ordinary rescue. He didn't know who this alien woman was or why she was here, but one thing was clear. Her survival depended on him and on the broken radio in his hands. Cole carefully carried the alien woman, who was still weak, back to his outpost. He had no idea what kind of trouble she was in, but one thing was clear. She needed help, and fast. The vehicle's engine hummed softly as he drove, the sounds of the desert fading away with each mile. The woman was lying next to him, her breathing steady but slow, still too weak to speak much. He couldn't help but wonder about her species, her mission, and why she had ended up here. But more importantly, Cole was now responsible for her survival. He had to get her somewhere safe, somewhere she could recover. The outpost wasn't much, but it was all he had. Upon arrival, Cole rushed to the medical bay, where he gently laid her on the cot. The room was quiet except for the soft beeping of the machines. He quickly checked her vitals. It didn't look like anything life-threatening, but the crash had obviously taken a toll on her. She stirred slightly, her eyes flickering open. She blinked a few times, trying to focus on him. You saved me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't expect to be found." Cole gave her a reassuring smile. "It's my job to help, even if I'm not a medic," he said, though he wasn't sure how much of that she could understand. Her eyes studied him closely, a faint glow in her gaze, as if trying to decide if she could trust him. "My name is Thelina," she said slowly, her voice still shaky. "I didn't mean to bring you into this." "You're welcome," Cole replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And don't worry about it. I'll get you fixed up, and you can tell me what happened." Thelina's gaze dropped to the broken radio in her hands. I need to fix this first," she said, her voice more urgent now. "It's my only way home." Cole took the radio gently from her hands and studied it closely. He was still unsure what kind of alien technology it was, but it was clearly advanced. The screen was cracked, and the wiring inside had shorted out. Yet, despite the damage, he could feel its importance. This wasn't just any device. It was crucial for something, and that something was keeping Thelina here. "I'll do what I can," he said. "I can fix it, but you'll have to rest for a while. You're not in any condition to be moving around just yet." Thelina closed her eyes, her face filled with a mixture of relief and frustration. "I can't stay long," she murmured. "They're coming. My enemies will find me soon." And then she trailed off, clearly afraid of what would happen if they caught up with her. "Who are they?" Cole asked, sitting down beside her. He had never expected to get caught up in something like this. An alien woman, a broken radio, and an unknown enemy hot on her trail. It felt like something out of one of the old space novels he used to read as a kid. Thelina hesitated, then spoke in a soft voice, almost too quiet to hear. "They are a faction from my world. They don't want peace. They want control. I was sent to make contact with other species, to share knowledge. But they attacked my ship before I could complete my mission." Cole's brow furrowed as he listened. The thought of peaceful aliens being attacked seemed so out of place. After all, humans had only recently begun to explore beyond their own planet, let alone interact with other species. The idea of someone being out there to negotiate peace, only to be hunted down, didn't sit right with him. "You're not alone, you know," Cole said, offering her a small smile. "I'm here. I'll fix your radio." and I'll help you however I can." Felina gave him a grateful smile, though her eyes were still filled with worry. "I am grateful. But you need to understand, if they find me, it will be dangerous. For both of us." Cole nodded, not entirely sure how dangerous things could get, but feeling a sense of responsibility. This wasn't just about repairing a broken radio. He was now in the middle of something much bigger. A mission, a struggle that reached far beyond his outpost. With that in mind, he stood and moved over to his workbench. The tools were basic, but he had learned to make do with what he had. As he began to work on the alien radio, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. What if these enemies were more than just a small faction? What if they were more powerful than anything he could imagine? But the more he worked, the more his thoughts drifted to Felina. She was more than just a stranded alien. She was on a mission, and she had been sent to make peace. That was something worth fighting for. If it were up to him, he would protect her until she could finish what she had started. He worked through the night, carefully soldering wires and reprogramming the damaged components. The radio was complicated, but not impossible. It was like nothing he'd ever worked on before, but that didn't stop him. He was an engineer, and solving problems was what he did best. Around sunrise, the radio was finally starting to come back to life. Felina, still lying on the cot, watched him work, her eyes filled with silent gratitude. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was as if they both understood the seriousness of the situation. When the radio flickered on, the faint hum of power returning to it seemed almost like a victory. It wasn't completely fixed, but it was functional. Felina's face brightened when she saw the screen light up. "It's working," she whispered in awe. "You did it." Cole smiled, wiping his brow. "It's not done yet, but it's getting there." Felina reached out and touched his arm lightly. "You don't know what this means," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "You saved my life, and you've given me a chance to finish what I started." As the radio slowly came to life, Cole realized that, for the first time in a long while, he felt part of something bigger than himself. This wasn't just a broken radio. It was the key to her survival, and maybe even peace among the stars. The next day, Cole woke up early. The outpost was still quiet, with the sounds of the desert winds drifting in through the cracked windows. He rubbed his eyes, stretched, and got to work. Felina was still resting, but she seemed more stable now. Her breathing was even, and the faint color had returned to her skin. The worst of the crash seemed to be behind her. However, the work on her radio was far from finished. It was a complicated device, far more advanced than anything Cole had worked with before. Some parts of the radio were beyond repair. He could tell it had been built with technology far beyond human engineering. But Cole wasn't the kind of person to back down from a challenge. As he worked, he kept thinking about the strange alien woman lying in his outpost, her peaceful mission shattered by an unknown enemy. He had already learned so much in the past 24 hours. Felina wasn't just any alien traveler. She was a diplomat, a representative of her people, sent to establish contact with other civilizations. And yet, instead of bringing peace, she had been forced into a battle for survival. Cole couldn't stop thinking about how her enemies had attacked her ship, how she had been left alone, stranded on this far-off world. He had no idea what kind of people would do something like that. The galaxy, as far as he knew, wasn't filled with enemies eager to destroy peaceful travelers. It was hard for him to imagine what she had been through. But she trusted him now. Felina had shared her story, her fears, and most importantly, she had placed her survival in his hands. Cole realized that without her radio, she had no way of contacting her people. She would be stuck here, alone, vulnerable, and at the mercy of the enemies hunting her down. When Felina woke up, it was late afternoon. Her blue skin had a soft glow in the light of the setting suns, and she blinked as if trying to adjust to the room. The first thing she did was glance at the workbench, where Cole had been toiling away all day. He hadn't expected her to wake up so soon, But there she was, looking at him with an intensity that made him pause. "How is it?" she asked softly, her voice still quiet but stronger than before. "I've made progress," Cole replied, looking up from his tools. "But it's going to take more time. I fixed the screen and most of the wiring. But some parts are, well, they're beyond what I can fix right now. I'll need a few more parts if it's going to work properly." Felina studied him for a moment. Her eyes were tired, but there was something else there. Something that felt like trust. She nodded slowly. "I understand," she said, her voice a little stronger now. "I trust you. You've done more than I expected." Cole wasn't used to being trusted like that. As an engineer, his work was important, but it was always about fixing machines, not people. Yet here she was, a stranger from another world, depending on him for her survival. He felt a little out of his depth, but he wasn't about to let her down. "I'll get it done," he promised, determination settling in his chest. "Thank you," she whispered, closing her eyes again as she leaned back against the pillow. "I didn't think anyone would help me. I didn't expect kindness from a stranger." It was an odd thing to hear, especially coming from someone as alien as Felina. But Cole understood. In a universe filled with unknowns, trust was a rare and precious thing. And maybe that was what had made this situation so strange. He was just a regular engineer, not a soldier or a diplomat. But somehow, it was up to him to make sure this alien woman, who had been sent to bring peace, survived. For the next few hours, Cole worked without rest. He took the broken parts of the radio and started scavenging through his workshop, searching for any materials he could use. Some things he could make from scratch. Others would need to be adapted. He wasn't sure it would be enough, but he had to try. Felina stayed in the medical room, resting, but her presence was a constant reminder of the weight of the task ahead. She had already opened up to him more than anyone else ever had. And even though she was still a mystery in many ways, Cole couldn't help but feel responsible for her. It wasn't just the radio that needed fixing, it was her future. As the night began to settle in, the sounds of the desert became more pronounced. The wind picked up, rattling the windows of the outpost, and Cole found himself working late into the evening. The radio was still stubborn, its signals weak and its display flickering. But at least it was functional. Felina's voice interrupted his focus as she stepped into the workshop. She was moving more easily now, though her steps were still slow. "Cole," she said, her tone hesitant, "I need to ask you something." Cole looked up, wiping his hands on a rag. "What is it? Why are you helping me?" Felina asked, her eyes searching his. "You don't have to. You could have left me to die in that desert. I don't understand why." Cole hesitated for a moment, unsure how to answer. The truth was simple but complex. He was helping her because it felt like the right thing to do. "I guess I don't really have a good reason," he said slowly, shrugging. "Maybe because it's the right thing to do. You're not just some random traveler. You're here for peace, and you've been betrayed. I can't just ignore that." Her eyes softened, a glimmer of emotion passing through them. She walked over to him, and without saying a word, gently placed a hand on his arm. It wasn't much, but it was enough. In that moment, Cole understood that his actions had already meant more than just fixing a machine. They had meant something deeper, something more personal. "You're more than I ever thought humans could be," she said quietly, her voice sincere. Cole felt a warm flush of pride. He wasn't sure where this strange connection would lead, but for now he had a mission, a promise to keep, and he was going to finish it. The next few days passed in a blur of work, tension, and strange moments of understanding. Cole spent every waking hour trying to fix the alien radio, scavenging through his workshop for spare parts and using whatever materials he could find. Despite the progress he had made, the radio was still stubborn. The device was intricate, and parts of it seemed almost alive, as if it reacted to Cole's touch. He had never seen anything like it before. But each time he thought he had it fixed, something else would go wrong. Felina, meanwhile, was growing stronger. She still rested a lot, but she was more alert now, walking around the outpost, speaking to Cole in quiet moments. She told him about her people, the peaceful mission she had been on, and the enemies who had hunted her down. Her eyes were still filled with the weight of her mission, but every day she seemed to trust him more. But even as they worked side by side, a sense of urgency lingered in the air. Felina had made it clear her enemies were not far behind. The more time they spent fixing the radio, the more they risked being found. One evening, as the suns began to set and the desert wind howled outside, Cole was deep in his work on the radio when he felt a strange sensation, a prickling at the back of his neck. He looked up from his tools, his eyes scanning the room, but there was nothing there. He shook it off. Maybe he was just tired. Then the faintest sound reached his ears, a strange humming noise. It was coming from outside, from the direction of the sand dunes. It wasn't the usual sounds of the desert. This was different. It sounded mechanical. His heart skipped a beat. "Felina," Cole called, his voice urgent. He rushed to the small room where she had been resting, his mind racing. He had a bad feeling about this. "We need to move. Now." Felina, who had been sitting by the window, turned to face him, her eyes wide with fear. "They found us," she whispered. She stood up, her legs still unsteady, but there was no time to wait. "We don't have much time." Cole rushed to grab his tools and shut down the outpost's systems. The last thing they needed was any kind of signal going out, alerting their enemies to their exact location. He glanced at the radio on his workbench. It was nearly ready. Just a few more adjustments, and it could send a signal strong enough to reach Felina's people. But now he wasn't sure they had the time. "What should we do?" Cole asked, his voice tense. Felina's face was pale, her eyes wide with panic, but she forced herself to stay calm. "We need to hide. My enemies are relentless. They won't stop until they find me. And if they find you, they will take you too." Cole's mind raced. He didn't want to hide. He couldn't leave everything to chance. But Felina was right. If they stayed out in the open, they would be easy targets. He grabbed a bag, packed a few essentials, and looked over at Felina. "We have to move. Get to the caves behind the outpost. It's the only place where they might not find us." Felina nodded, not needing any more explanation. She was already moving toward the door. Cole followed her closely, his heart pounding. The humming noise outside was growing louder. It wasn't a good sign. They were getting closer. As they hurried through the corridors of the outpost, Cole could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. They were being hunted by people who were willing to destroy everything to prevent peace. Cole couldn't let that happen, not if he could stop it. They reached the hidden exit that led to a series of caves in the rocky hills behind the outpost. Cole had never been to these caves before, but they had been marked on the maps he'd studied when he arrived. The entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for one person to squeeze through. But it led deep into the mountains, and the winding tunnels would hide them for a while. It had to be enough. "Stay close," Cole whispered, his voice low as they entered the dark cave. The air inside was cool, a stark contrast to the burning heat of the desert outside. Felina followed him, her footsteps quiet but quick. She was more agile now, but her strength was still fragile. Cole kept a close eye on her, ready to support her if she needed help. They moved through the winding tunnels, deeper into the cave system. The sound of the outside world, wind, machines, and distant voices, faded as they went further in. The caves were a maze, but Cole trusted his instincts. They would find a place to wait, a place where they could regroup. Suddenly, a harsh noise echoed from outside the cave. It was the unmistakable sound of a ship landing. Cole froze, his breath caught in his chest. The enemy had arrived. "Felina," Cole whispered urgently. "What do we do now?" She looked around, her mind working quickly. "I can't lead them away. Not anymore. But we have one chance. You can fix the radio. You have to send the signal. If I can get to the top of the cliffs, maybe I can distract them long enough for you to send the message." Cole's eyes widened. It was a dangerous plan, but it was the only one they had. "Are you sure?" Felina gave him a determined look, her eyes filled with fire. "It's the only way. You fix the radio. I'll do the rest." And just like that, Cole understood. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about sending a message that could change everything. As they headed back to the outpost, Cole's mind raced with the possibilities. He didn't know if Felina would make it, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let her face this alone. The outpost was eerily silent as Cole and Felina returned, the only sound being the soft echo of their footsteps. The caves behind them had been their temporary shelter, but now the urgency had returned. Felina's plan was risky, but it was their only chance. "I'll keep them distracted," she said quietly, glancing at Cole. "You fix the radio and send the message. It has to reach my people." Cole nodded, but his heart was pounding in his chest. There was so much at stake, and even though he had fixed parts of the radio, he wasn't sure if it would work properly. But there was no time to waste. "Be careful," Cole said, his voice filled with concern. He couldn't help but feel responsible for her safety. But she was already moving, determination in her every step. Felina turned and vanished into the darkness, leaving Cole standing alone in the dimly lit outpost. The urgency of the situation weighed heavily on him. Her enemies were closing in, and if they didn't act fast, they would lose everything. He had to send the message, even if he wasn't sure it would make a difference. It had to. Cole rushed back to his workbench, where the damaged radio still sat. He had already fixed some of the components, but there were still parts that needed work. The signals were weak, flickering in and out. The radio was far more complicated than he'd expected. He wasn't even sure if the technology was compatible with his own, but there was no choice but to try. He focused on the radio, his hands working quickly as he tightened wires, adjusted settings, and reprogrammed parts of the system. Sweat dripped from his forehead as he pushed himself to work faster. Each moment felt like it could be their last. Outside, the sound of a ship growing louder made his heart race. It was their enemies, whoever they were, landing near the outpost. The unmistakable whir of engines and the hum of approaching figures meant they were getting closer. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. He needed to get the radio working. The message was simple but vital. If he could get it right, it would reach Felina's people, and help would come. But even if it worked, it wasn't a guarantee that they would be able to escape. Felina was counting on him, and he had to do everything he could to make sure they both survived this. As he worked, his mind raced with thoughts of what might happen. What if the signal didn't reach? What if Felina couldn't distract them long enough? What if they were too late? But there was no time to think about that. Cole focused all his energy on the radio. He'd seen advanced technologies before, but nothing like this. The alien systems were delicate, sensitive to even the smallest touch, and he was playing a dangerous game by trying to fix it with limited tools. But somehow, with each adjustment, the radio's display grew steadier. The static began to clear. The frequencies started to stabilize. He held his breath as he pushed the final button. For a moment, there was nothing. The radio was silent. Then, a faint signal hummed in the air, growing louder and clearer. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. He had done it. The message would go out. Cole's eyes widened as he realized that the signal was already being sent. It was weak, but it was working. It was reaching across the vast distance of space, broadcasting Felina's coordinates and a call for help. He didn't know how long the message would last, but at least it was a start. But just as relief began to settle in, a loud crash echoed from outside. A heavy thud, followed by the sound of boots scraping against the rocky floor. Felina's plan had worked. She had distracted them. But now, they were here. Cole turned to look at the entrance. The enemies were close. The time for hiding was over. The radio crackled one last time. Its message now fully sent. Its job done. Cole grabbed the device, his heart racing. "Thelina," he called, rushing toward the entrance. He couldn't see her, but he knew she was out there, somewhere in the chaos. He just hoped she could hold her ground long enough for the message to reach the right people. Thelina's voice rang out from the distance, sharp and clear. "Cole, I've got them distracted, but I can't keep them away for long." Cole moved quickly, running toward the outer corridors. He had to get to her before it was too late. He knew the risks. He knew he was walking straight into danger, but he wasn't about to leave her behind. She had trusted him, and now he had to return the favor. Outside, the battle had already started. Thelina's enemies, armed with high-tech weapons, were trying to break into the outpost. They were merciless, relentless in their pursuit of her, but Cole didn't care about that. He had one mission now, to help Thelina. "Thelina!" Cole shouted again, his voice carrying through the air as he raced toward the top of the cliff where she had been. The sound of blaster fire echoed in the distance. He couldn't tell if Thelina was winning or losing, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let her fight alone. The signal was sent. Now it was just a matter of time before help arrived. But would it be enough? He hoped so. As Cole reached the top of the cliff, he saw Thelina standing strong, her eyes locked on the enemy. She was using every bit of strength she had to keep them at bay. Her focus was unwavering, and for a moment, Cole just watched her, admiring her courage. Then, without a word, he joined her, ready to face whatever came next. Together, they would face the enemy. Together, they had a chance. The wind howled around them as Cole and Thelina stood at the edge of the cliff, the vast desert stretching out below them. The enemy was close now. Cole could hear their voices, muffled by the distance but growing clearer by the second. He glanced at Thelina, whose eyes were fixed on the approaching figures. She was standing tall, her posture defiant, though her body still trembled from the injuries she had suffered. Cole couldn't imagine what it was like for her, being hunted, fighting for her life. But despite everything, she remained calm. Her focus never wavered. "Stay close," Thelina said softly, her voice carrying a calmness that didn't match the chaos surrounding them. "I'll hold them off as long as I can. You need to finish the job." Cole nodded. He didn't want to leave her side, but he understood. Thelina had given him a mission, and now it was up to him to see it through. He had done what he could with the radio, but now the signal was weak. They had to buy more time, wait for reinforcements, and make sure that when help arrived, they were still alive. "They'll come," Thelina continued, her eyes scanning the horizon. "My people will hear the signal. I just need a little more time." Time. It was the one thing they didn't have much of. The sound of the enemy's footsteps grew louder, the crunch of boots on the rocky ground signaling that they were getting closer. Cole could feel his pulse quicken. He had always been good at fixing things, at solving problems. But this was different. He had never faced an enemy like this. The outpost was no longer a safe haven. It was a battlefield, and the stakes were higher than ever. He glanced back at Thelina. She was still focused, her eyes narrowed as she watched the enemy approach. She seemed to be preparing herself for something. A fight, a stand. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about protecting what was right, about fighting for peace, for the future. Thelina turned toward Cole, catching his gaze. "When they come," she said quietly, "I need you to run. Don't stay to fight. Get to the caves. If you can't help me, you need to survive. My people will need you." Cole's heart sank. He wasn't sure he could leave her. He wasn't sure he could survive without her. But she was right. If the situation became too dangerous, his first priority had to be getting to safety. "I won't leave you," he said, his voice firm. "I'll stay with you." Thelina's eyes softened for a moment. "You're a good man," she said, her voice filled with quiet admiration. "But you're not a soldier. You don't have to fight this battle. Just make sure the signal gets through. That's what matters." Before Cole could reply, the first of the enemy soldiers appeared at the edge of the cliff. They were humanoid, their forms tall and armored, their eyes hidden behind dark visors. Their weapons gleamed in the dim light of the setting suns, and their movements were swift and precise. They were prepared for a fight. They had the numbers. "Thalina," one of them shouted, his voice amplified by a comm device. "You're surrounded. Surrender now, and we won't harm you. Resist, and we'll be forced to take action." Cole's hand tightened around a nearby rock. He wasn't a fighter, but he wasn't about to let them take her without a fight. Thalina took a deep breath, her voice calm but firm as she addressed the enemy. "I'm not your prisoner," she said. "I'm here to bring peace, but if you think I'll let you stop me, you're mistaken." The leader of the soldiers gave a low chuckle, clearly unfazed by her words. "Peace? You've brought nothing but chaos. You don't belong here. You'll never get what you came for." As the soldiers began to move in closer, Cole felt his stomach twist in knots. They were closing in on them, their weapons raised, ready to strike. Thalina didn't flinch. Instead, she stood taller, her eyes hardening with determination. "Do you understand what you're fighting for?" Thalina said, her voice louder now, filled with conviction. "You've been missiled. Your leaders don't want peace. They want power, and you've been used." The leader paused, a flicker of hesitation passing over his face, but only for a moment. Then he raised his weapon and aimed it at her. "No more talking," he said coldly. Thalina moved swiftly, her actions so fast that Cole barely had time to react. She dodged the blast, her movements a blur. She reached for her own weapon, a sleek silver gun, and fired in return. The soldier who had aimed at her fell to the ground, incapacitated. Cole watched, his breath caught in his chest. It was like watching a warrior fight, someone who had trained for moments like this. But even with her skill, there were too many of them. He could hear the sound of reinforcements arriving, the heavy steps of more soldiers running toward the cliff. "Thalina," Cole shouted, fear rising in his chest. "We need to go. Now." But Thalina shook her head, her expression fierce. "I won't run. Not until my people have a chance." Cole's heart raced, and he knew she wasn't going to back down. But he also knew she couldn't keep fighting forever. The enemy would overwhelm her. It was only a matter of time. He turned and ran, heading toward the caves, hoping that he could make it in time to warn anyone who might be coming. He didn't know if he could help, but he couldn't just stand there. Not when there was still a chance to survive. As Cole reached the entrance of the caves, he glanced back. Thalina was still standing her ground, firing at the advancing soldiers. She was determined, but he could see that she was struggling. Every shot took more effort. Her movements were slower now. He wanted to stay. He wanted to fight by her side. But he had made a promise. He had to survive. He had to keep the message alive. He pushed forward, hoping that Thalina's bravery wouldn't be in vain. The winds had settled by the time the reinforcements arrived. The alien ships landed gently, their engines whirring softly as they touched down on the rocky surface. Cole stood beside Thalina, her body still trembling from the fight, but her expression was one of quiet victory. She had held off the enemy long enough for help to arrive, and now her people were here to take over. The first of the soldiers stepped off the ship, their blue armor gleaming under the desert sun. They were tall, with sharp features and an air of authority. As they approached, Cole could see the look of gratitude and admiration in their eyes when they saw Thalina standing strong, despite the toll the battle had taken on her. "Thalina," one of them called, his voice deep and respectful. "We received your signal. We are here." Thalina gave a small nod, though her movements were slow. She was exhausted, her energy drained by the long fight. But there was no sign of defeat in her posture. She stood tall, her gaze unwavering. "We've made it," she said, her voice steady but soft. "It wasn't easy, but we're alive." The soldiers quickly moved to assess the situation, checking the perimeter and making sure the area was secure. They set up defensive lines, prepared for any last-minute threats from the retreating enemy forces. But the battle was over. The reinforcements had arrived in time, and the soldiers who had chased Thelina were no longer a threat. Cole watched as Thelina's people worked with efficiency, quickly securing the area and taking control of the situation. He could see the relief in their eyes, but it wasn't just relief for their own safety. They had come for something bigger, something more important. The leader of the reinforcements approached Thelina and Cole. His tall frame loomed over them, his eyes sharp and calculating. But there was a hint of respect in his gaze as he addressed Thelina. "You've done well," he said. "We owe you our thanks." Thelina gave him a small smile, though she was clearly tired. "I didn't do it alone," she replied, her eyes shifting toward Cole. "This man, Cole, he helped me. Without him, none of this would have been possible." The leader looked at Cole, his expression thoughtful. "You are a human," he said, his voice slightly surprised. "I did not expect a human to play such a role in this mission. Do you understand what you're fighting for?" Thelina said, her voice louder now, filled with conviction. "You've been missiled. Your leaders don't want peace. They want power, and you've been used." The leader paused, a flicker of hesitation passing over his face, but only for a moment. Then he raised his weapon and aimed it at her. "No more talking," he said coldly. Thelina moved swiftly, her actions so fast that Cole barely had time to react. She dodged the blast, her movements a blur. She reached for her own weapon, a sleek silver gun, and fired in return. The soldier who had aimed at her fell to the ground, incapacitated. Cole watched, his breath caught in his chest. It was like watching a warrior fight, someone who had trained for moments like this. But even with her skill, there were too many of them. He could hear the sound of reinforcements arriving, the heavy steps of more soldiers running toward the cliff. "Thelina," Cole shouted, fear rising in his chest. "We need to go. Now." But Thelina shook her head, her expression fierce. "I won't run. Not until my people have a chance." Cole's heart raced, and he knew she wasn't going to back down. But he also knew she couldn't keep fighting forever. The enemy would overwhelm her. It was only a matter of time. He turned and ran, heading toward the caves, hoping that he could make it in time to warn anyone who might be coming. He didn't know if he could help, but he couldn't just stand there. Not when there was still a chance to survive. As Cole reached the entrance of the caves, he glanced back. Thelina was still standing her ground, firing at the advancing soldiers. She was determined, but he could see that she was struggling. Every shot took more effort. Her movements were slower now. He wanted to stay. He wanted to fight by her side. But he had made a promise. He had to survive. He had to keep the message alive. He pushed forward, hoping that Thelina's bravery wouldn't be in vain. The winds had settled by the time the reinforcements arrived. The alien ships landed gently, their engines whirring softly as they touched down on the rocky surface. Cole stood beside Thelina, her body still trembling from the fight, but her expression was one of quiet victory. She had held off the enemy long enough for help to arrive, and now her people were here to take over. The first of the soldiers stepped off the ship, their blue armor gleaming under the desert sun. They were tall, with sharp features and an air of authority. As they approached, Cole could see the look of gratitude and admiration in their eyes when they saw Thelina standing strong, despite the toll the battle had taken on her. "Thelina," one of them called, his voice deep and respectful. "We received your signal. We are here." Thelina gave a small nod, though her movements were slow. She was exhausted, her energy drained by the long fight. But there was no sign of defeat in her posture. She stood tall, her gaze unwavering. "We've made it," she said, her voice steady but soft. "It wasn't easy, but we're alive." The soldiers quickly moved to assess the situation, checking the perimeter and making sure the area was secure. They set up defensive lines, prepared for any last-minute threats from the retreating enemy forces. But the battle was over. The reinforcements had arrived in time, and the soldiers who had chased Thelina were no longer a threat. Cole watched as Thelina's people worked with efficiency, quickly securing the area and taking control of the situation. He could see the relief in their eyes, but it wasn't just relief for their own safety. They had come for something bigger, something more important. The leader of the reinforcements approached Thelina and Cole. His tall frame loomed over them, his eyes sharp and calculating. But there was a hint of respect in his gaze as he addressed Thelina. "You've done well," he said. "We owe you our thanks." Thelina gave him a small smile, though she was clearly tired. "I didn't do it alone," she replied, her eyes shifting toward Cole. "This man, Cole, he helped me. Without him, none of this would have been possible." The leader looked at Cole, his expression thoughtful. "You are a human," he said, his voice slightly surprised. "I did not expect a human to play such a role in this mission."